My name's Miriam Berkowitz. I was born and raised right here in Toronto. A very loving family from England, traditional Jewish, but not observant. So growing up, I remember, for example, like having Shabbat dinners together with my grandparents, and that was like our weekly, when we would all sit down together for dinner. Otherwise, we were a very busy family. We had great times together. So from a very early age, I remember thinking, like, I almost used to think that I was like part of some weird experiment, like aliens were like watching me to see, what I was going to do next, like in this situation, what would happen. And I recognized, like, from like almost, I think I must have been like 8 or 9. My mother was a scientist, so I think that's where I got, like, it's an experimental thing. And then I realized, oh, like, I think that there's this like higher being, but I had never been exposed to religion in that way. We were a very, I want to say, traditional family, but secular in terms of, like, we didn't want to be too serious about everything. And we wanted to, like, life was very light. So, like, we wouldn't really speak about God or Hashem. We would talk about things just in very general, light terms. And being serious about religion was kind of something to be laughed off. So it was a bit embarrassing for me when I started kind of wondering and having these questions. I do remember asking my parents to go to a more religious Hebrew school. They thought it was because a lot of our friends were doing it. My parents were atheist, so they didn't love the idea of bringing God into the picture, but they were happy for me to learn to read and write Hebrew. In terms of religion, at home, like I said, we did, Shabbat dinners. Shabbat sort of ended Friday nights for us, but I had very warm memories of spending Friday nights together as a family, eating dinner, having like nice debates at the family table. My family is very deep thinker, passionate people, so that's what we would always be. Like, I remember the table was always engaged in really meaningful conversation. And the truth is, because we were so busy, we were, running to different programs. Thank God we were just busy during the week. Friday nights were really our only time to come together as a family, which is, I think, what brought me to this beauty of Shabbat. My grandparents lighting the Shabbat candles together was really that beautiful part that inspired me for Ian and I. From my understanding, his family was also more traditional. They didn't do like the Friday night dinners or Shabbat, but they had a very close-knit family. And his mother taught at Temple Har Zion, which is a Reform synagogue, and they were members there. So they had a deeper connection to Reform Judaism. When we met, I remember coming with him to his temple for a service. And so we were sort of trying to figure things out, what we would do when we got married. We decided we would go to Beth Tikva, and then we sort of kind of shifted from there a little bit. We were really trying to figure out our way where we don't take anything too seriously, but we want to still bring it into the family. My parents were very clear that the most important thing to them was that we were happy as children, and love is love, and we should just marry who was right for us. The big step for me was just feeling comfortable enough to share with my husband that I had this side of me. So as I said, growing up, I was very embarrassed. Like, I took my father's siddur that was downstairs, and I brought it up to my bedroom, and I hid it in a cupboard in my bedroom, and I learned to read the prayers on my own, and I would hide it. And then I remember when my husband and I went on a vacation together, I had hid the siddur in my suitcase, and I brought it out, and I was like, okay, I feel comfortable enough now in my marriage to share this with my husband. So it's really a gift that he gave me, that I was like, okay, I want to say, like, coming out as being a more spiritual, deeply religious person without the observances, I would say. And so just by feeling comfortable being able to share that with him, it started me starting to ask questions. And then I think the second biggest impactful moment was when we had our first son. We were like still figuring things out. And I think we both felt it was important to raise him with strong Jewish identity. And we weren't clear on how to do that. So we sent him to like a a Jewish preschool, a Chabad preschool. And I think that also was a bit of a turning point, that now we had a responsibility to give this over. And I don't think we had enough of a safety net around us where we knew what we were doing to be able to give this over properly. So I would say our first son was more like, I would say each child is a little bit different, and he's more like towards my side of being very contemplative, very like a spiritually deep-natured person, intense person like me. And he would ask a lot of questions based on, like, he would say, like, why aren't we keeping kosher at home? Like, he would come home with these songs. Or I remember we experienced our first Shabbat meal at Mora Esther Gitlin's house, and it was, wow, like the energy was totally different and it was beautiful. So in the preschool that we were at, which was Chabad Markham, there were a few families with kids in our kids' classes who also came to Thornhill Woods Shul. So they said, come check it out. You know, your kids are friends with our kids. They can just play together. It's a really relaxed, enjoyable atmosphere. At this point, we knew we wanted to do more Shabbats, and like as a family, as a real Shabbat experience with shul involved in it and a more Orthodox approach. We had an agreement once a month we were going to do a proper Shabbat together. And like at this point we were doing this, and at this point we had 2 toddlers, and I think I was expecting a third. We're hearing about Thornhill Woods Shul, and we had friends with kids there, and they were saying come. One Shabbat, I remember we decided, okay, like the kids are getting to a point where they do need other like kids in the area. We felt a sense of like we needed more, I needed more mom friends on the same wavelength of me, you know, to spend Shabbats with. So we made the trek up to Thornhill Woods Shul with our friends, and the rest is history. The kids were engaged in a kids program where they knew a lot of the kids there because they were in preschool with them. And my husband and I were able to go to a class that was really engaging and thought-provoking, that led us to come home and talk about that class, which brought back my own memories of Shabbat dinners with meaningful conversation. And from there, we were like invited all the time to different homes, to in the area, like almost every week we were out for lunches on Shabbats, and we were experiencing Shabbat in a way that we had never experienced it. And it was like opening this whole new world of being in this family connected mode for a day that I can't even describe in words. It's something you need to experience to truly appreciate it. We were still not an observant family. On the Shabbats that we would come to people's homes, obviously we would be in the area, so we were walking from shul, but we still, you know, turned on lights, and we were not, you know, keeping kosher at home. We were on a journey, and we enjoyed the Shabbat experience. It took us some time, and we were all at different paces of when we were ready to start shifting how we as a family unit brought that Shabbat experience home to us. I think coming to Judaism, what I've recognized is not something that you just like arrive at. It's a journey that's lifelong. I'm still learning and growing every day, and my husband as well, and my kids as well. I don't think that there's a point that what I realize, the more I learn, the more I want to learn, the more I want to do. And there are things that I had never heard of that as I keep learning, I'm learning. So I don't really feel like it's something that was in the past. I feel like I'm still living it now. And if I were to think back to when we first started, the biggest difference was, and the struggle, I think, was my husband and I are very different types of people. So for me, also, I had this benefit of my own personal struggles of hiding sort of my religious practices and prayers and the connection that I had with God, with Hashem growing up. I had that background already. So I had this connection that I think my husband was still percolating with when I was more ready to jump 2 feet in and let's just do everything. Our kids were little, so they were like, well, no, like, why aren't we doing this? And at that point, we had a rabbi in Rebbitzin who our kids were always playing with, and we were always at their house, and they did things like this, and it made sense. Oh, we should just do it. And my husband was actually very good about it. He said, okay, we'll make our house kosher. We continued coming for Shabbats. At one point, I remember like I would go every week for Shabbat mornings, because what my husband and I would do is, at this point, I had a newborn, but we would take turns sleeping in on the weekends. So, when you have like kids and you're up all night, one person would sleep in on Saturday morning and one person would sleep in on Sunday morning. So my husband would take the boys on Sunday morning, and he would go to remember he went to the Pickle Barrel in Promenade Mall, and he would take them for breakfast and let me sleep. So I took them on Saturday mornings, and that would be our thing. We would go up to shul, and sometimes he would join us and sometimes he would sleep in. And I guess I had that also added benefit of I really integrated into the community, and there were lots of other young families. So I became like mom friends, and there were during the week like moms and tots classes. So I was off on mat leave at this point again, and I could have my toddler, or at this point he was in a bucket. And I remember sitting in the basement and learning with one of the Rebbitzins here, Eliza Cohen. And I had, my son Ben in the bucket, and that was like just extra inspiration that carried through the week as well, with the classes and integrating day-to-day Jewish life into our week as well. As I slowly, because I started my own practice and I worked from home, I was also getting together more with people in the community who were like-minded than I was, that probably my husband was, who was at work and not experiencing all of this. So we kind of went at different paces and came to it differently. One of the hard things for me was changing the way I dressed and covering my hair, because how I presented to the world, especially working like in healthcare in a secular environment, I wasn't sure how that would go down. And also, like, all my friends and family are not observant. So I didn't want to create this like very observable define between us. And so that took some time for me to kind of get my head around. The more 2 feet in approach was really hard for my husband in terms of kashrus and Shabbat. So keeping a kosher home was okay. My husband is a real foodie. So like, I'm a dietitian, I also enjoy food. He taught me how to cook. He loves food. He grew up with like a real sense of like, food is how we experience things. And so becoming kosher was like, well, wait a minute, now you're telling me I can't eat cheese with all these things that it was that part, I think, was hard for him. Something I definitely got from my parents. In terms of Judaism, even though they're not observant, they taught me so much that are reflective of the Jewish values that I love. So my grandmother first passed away, and my parents brought Shabbat dinners to our house, and we never missed lighting the candles together. My grandfather would come over, and I would watch her prepare extra food for him to bring back for him. And that was, a constant, that even though my parents were so busy, it was really important for them, and they stuck with that, like picking something that could be really, really hard, and I want to say like just plowing your way through it and not giving up even when things do get really hard. I look up to my mother tremendously. She was totally a glass ceiling crasher as a woman. She came over from England, and at that time, in the late 70s in Canada, as an immigrant, she got her PhD while she was having children here, and then she became like one of these top scientists here, and now she holds the Order of Canada. And I watched her struggle through this. It's not easy for a woman who's raising a family, in a different country, to really break through that. And science was a man's world. And I know she had told me that, there were times that people said to her, just, don't worry about it. Like, this isn't going to work out for you. And she pushed through. And I look at her now, and she's still such a role model in her field. And she stuck with it, and she really succeeded. Spoke about how it was hard for me to, for example, cover my hair, because I didn't want it to create this very obvious difference between me and my secular family and friends, colleagues. So when I started covering my hair, it was tough for me because I have naturally thick, long hair. My husband loves it. It was something like I was always playing with my hair. It was a comfort. It was a blanket for me. And I started wrapping my hair. And it internalized for me that I was now an observant woman. So it validated, I guess, a lot of the internal work that I had been doing. And what I recognized is, as I started putting out that energy, at first I was only wrapping my hair on Shabbats. But once I put out that energy, people would mirror it back to me, and I found it very validating. And I still had my hair out at home and other times for my husband. And as the years have gone on, and going out to color my hair all the time because I liked my highlights and whatever, and having time to blow dry my hair straight all the time to look perfect, as we had more kids and we became more busy, was not always so practical. And then I got my first wig, and it was like I could just wake up in the morning and put my hair on and feel put together, and I felt put together and good about myself, and I really enjoyed that part of it too. Now I can not have to worry about running to the hairdresser, and I still keep my hair nice for my husband at home, but it's not with the same pressure and time commitment that I needed to before. The advice I would have wanted to hear was that coming to shul, you don't need to commit to being 100% what you feel you need to be to fit in. So I was intimidated to come to a shul where everyone was growing at a certain pace, where everyone did certain things that I wasn't ready to necessarily do in my home with my family. And I think until I actually came through the doors and met these people and sat in their houses and realized that the Rebbitzin and Rabbi were really just regular people that were not intimidating at all, it gave me also a confidence in it's okay to just be me, and learning that aspect that Judaism teaches, that everybody is a different letter expression in the Torah, and we don't all need to be exactly alike in how we come to Judaism and how we express our Judaism, gave me this freedom. Okay, it's safe, and I think that's what I would have wanted to hear. I would want people to understand that when people are just starting out, in their observances, it doesn't mean that they don't know. It's not coming from an ignorance. So for example, I have some friends who are secular, but they know even a lot more than I do in terms of certain aspects of Judaism and observances, because they learned it and they came from a background that gave them the education. And I think even for myself coming into it, there were some things like, for example, prayer I did know. And I think sometimes when, as a Balei Tshuva, we're spoken to, or as someone who's not observant, when you're kind of spoken down to in a way of like, oh, you just don't understand this, it can give you a feeling of separation. And I think what I would say, and what I try to be very sensitive to when I speak to people who are not outwardly as observant as I, is recognizing that they often have the same knowledge, if not more, in different aspects of Judaism than I do, and I have what to learn from them as well, and that's how we kind of come together and grow together. I think that being part of the community, it's almost like having a second family. What brought me to this community was that it really feels like home, like family. It's not like going to a shul and it's something separate. We're living our lives together. We're raising our kids together. And when they say, oh, it takes a village, I remember when I was having kids, I was like, okay, so where's the village? Well, here's the village. And like I said, what brought me to it was always being in everybody else's homes. And so I think that something I love to do now is have people in my home and have my home be very open, especially to lots of the children in the community, for them to come to host for Shabbat meals whenever I can. And my kids enjoy hosting as well, bringing classes into our home and making our home part of that open community concept. In general, our families are very supportive. I can speak to, for example, my family. Me and my sisters are totally different people. We live very different lifestyles, and my parents have been very good at still being supportive of where each of us is at. In terms of the specifics, some of the struggles were, for example, when we started keeping a kosher home, that was hard. For example, I know my mother loves to have the grandkids over and feed them. And so that for her, I know was a point where she then she was amazing. She got these plastic bins, and she got a bin for dairy and a bin for meat, and she got these stovetop cookers and all these things, and so that because she would love to have the grandkids over and she wanted to be able to cook for them in her home, and when we would come over, then we would be able to cook in her home, and we would bring the bins up from the basement, they're still there, and then we can eat kosher at her home. Around the holiday times, obviously our families would like to have hosted some of the holidays. I can imagine we've never really had a conversation where someone aired grievances, but I can imagine that was hard for them. And when we host the family meals by us, but second nights, for example, my sister-in-law would still host at her, and we would do another family that night by us. And that was kind of a bigger shift, was recognizing, okay, so we're going to host these family meals, and how can we incorporate the family and make them feel okay. So for example, Seder night, if we're going through the whole Seder, it's not what our families would typically have done. And they were really good about, sitting with us. We made it very fun and interactive, lots of games, lots of visuals. And I think they appreciated that. And then when they didn't want to stay to finish the Seder, they were also welcome to leave. We had Friday night dinners by us, and the family comes for Friday nights, and that's, something we host. And I think, as our parents get older, they still, my mom and my mother-in-law still bring food for us for every, Shabbat, what they can. And it's so nice that we can now host them. But it was a transition that I think was hard for them as well. I've always been a water person. I love water. I love swimming. Just being in the water for me feels very comfortable. I guess partly maybe I'm a fire sign. My husband's a water sign, so that popped into my head now. But I'm really drawn to the water. So being in the mikveh water, it just brings me back to myself, and I really do feel this kind of rebirth process. And it feels really nice to have that time just for me, with me and Hashem, and that renewal and freshness. The Thornhill Woods Shul has totally changed the lives of me, my husband, my children. I would even say my extended family, in that it has brought so much more meaning. It's helped us go through the ups and downs in life with clarity, with guidance, with the protection of those around us. And I can't thank the community enough for giving us this opportunity to live such a more meaningful, connected lives, not just lives, in our community, but with ourselves, with our spouses, with our parents, with our children, and how we interact with the world in general. The Thornhill Woods Shul is just, it literally never stops. There's something always happening. There's so many ways to connect with it. If you're not ready to come for a Shabbat, you can even just go for a Shabbat meal. You could go to a class. You could, listen to something. You could go to an event. There's always something happening. And the Thornhill Woods Shul people, I would say, because we don't have a specific building we go to, the people embody that whole experience. So even just connect with someone who goes to the Thornhill Woods Shul and you'll feel it right away.